Welcome, everybody. Welcome back, I should say. Today, we're once again speaking with Tom Montauk from montauk.net. He's a great writer, great thinker, a guy who thinks very clearly about a lot of these esoteric topics. And I'm really excited to have him join me today for the part 2 of our talk as part of a series where I'm calling it empirical mysticism. And it's basically just an attempt to explain all this crazy woo-woo type stuff that you've probably heard about and dismissed at some point or another in your life, and trying to contextualize it, trying to use a sort of Western, secular, humanist, post-Enlightenment language to come to grips with what these people were talking about, and seeing if we have any insights of our own to share. So, Tom, welcome. Thank you for coming once again. It was a lot of fun last time. Do you think we're going to have a
Yeah,
good
it was a
time
good show
today?
last time. Yeah, I'm glad to be on.
That's awesome. Well, today I thought a great topic. Last time we spoke about just the basics of altered states, right? We touched on theta, we touched on alpha state, we touched a bit on gamma, and I think we laid the groundwork pretty well. But another interesting topic, which for the longest time I didn't know how any of this related to, like where to put it, where to put it in order of priority, what it meant in general, and that's the etheric body, the energy body. What is this concept in general? Why does it keep coming up again and again in all these different systems? So, for example, you have chakra in the Indian system, you have chi in, I think, Taoism, or, I guess Tai Chi and Kung Fu, as people know it. And then you have Ki in Japan, which you have Reiki, right, which is this sort of thing that some people are into, where you, and then you have Vril, which is kind of like a European type version of that. And you have prana, which I think is another Indian version of it. So there's like all this stuff related to different kinds of energy. Tom, do you want to help me out here? What's going on with this? Where do we even begin discussing this?
No, it's a huge topic, and it's really important to grasp because, as we all should know, we're definitely more than our physical bodies, right? We can call this other part of ourselves the soul, the aura. But what you have to realize, though, is that this soul is merely the interface between your consciousness, which is off in some other dimension, and the physical body, which is here. So the part of the soul that interfaces with the physical body, that's what the mystics would call the etheric body. And the part of the soul that interfaces with that higher consciousness in the other dimension, they would call that part the astral body. So the soul actually consists of a minimum of two different parts, the etheric and the astral. And the reason why we have to make this distinction is exactly the same reason why we have to distinguish, let's say, between white matter and gray matter in the brain. It's all the brain, it's all brain tissue, but white matter and gray matter, they have different functions. They're made of different substances, and they have different structures. And so the same thing goes for the two major different parts of the soul. Now, the etheric body, that, as I mentioned, is a part of the soul that interfaces with the physical body. And that's what Rupert Sheldrake, that scientist, that's what he would call the morphogenetic field. Okay. And what it is, it's essentially a subtle energy field. It's what keeps the physical body alive. Now, the etheric body, as the name implies, is made of so-called etheric energy, which is just subtle energy. And you listed a bunch of different terms from different cultures and different traditions that refer to this exact same energy. Chi, prana, odic energy, orgone, vril, akasha, life force. Even Robert Monroe's books, in there it's called loosh. Okay. Now, the important thing to know about the etheric body, or the etheric field in general, is that because it's interfaced with the physical body, it's localized, meaning it has a certain position, and at a certain time. So it's kind of like a mirror of the physical with some extra stuff in there. So it's like the energetic understructure of the physical realm as we know it, including our own physical bodies. The etheric body is made of etheric energy, and etheric energy in general, this has been reported by many different like clairvoyants and psychics. They mentioned that it can flow like a kind of gas or like a kind of fluid, but it's not really a gas made of molecules or any sort of physical particle. It's something other dimensional that somehow couples to our physical world here, to the atoms, to the molecules, to the different quantum particles. There's something beneath the quantum layer that can affect these different particles, and that thing that's underneath it is what we would call the etheric plane. Okay, and our etheric body is made out of the substance of the etheric plane, which is like etheric energy. Our own etheric body, it's got many different structural elements to it. There's different patterns, rhythms, flows, like different sorts of energetic lattice work all throughout the body. And of course, in Chinese medicine, they would refer to these as meridian points. And in acupuncture, certain points, you stick needles in there to adjust the energetic flow and energetic density in those areas. And then that has impacts on your overall health, of different organs, including psychological health too. So there's this whole field of energy medicine that deals with measuring, sensing, manipulating the etheric body. And because of that, you're affecting the physical body because, of course, the etheric is interfaced with the physical. So that's what the etheric is. The interesting thing about it is that the etheric body, because it's what keeps us alive, it's not the thing that astral projects. I mean, as the name implies, astral projection or going out of your body, that involves the astral body, which I'll mention in a moment. So the etheric body, as long as you're alive, even if you're comatose, your etheric body is relatively coupled to your physical body. So it's in the body. It's always in the body. It might expand, it might contract, but it's always like with the body and keeping it alive. And the only time the etheric body ever really leaves the physical body is during death. Once that so-called link between consciousness and the physical body gets fully severed, then that's when the etheric body kind of leaves the physical body. And then once that leaves, all you're left with then is a corpse. Now, just as a side note, I've been trying to figure out like what exactly is this etheric energy? Like what is it really made of? And I found like different theories out there about what it could be. For example, there's a pretty good researcher and scientist named Stuart Hameroff. And he has an interesting theory about where consciousness begins in the body. And according to his theory, consciousness, or maybe just life force in general, it interfaces with the body in these subcellular structures called microtubules. These are like little very, very thin tubes that are inside of cells that create the actual cellular structure of the cells in our body. And these tubes can grow and shrink and move and reconnect in very dynamic ways, and they do it very, very quickly. They're almost like molecular computers that are responding to some sort of strange etheric signal that's being beamed at them. And what that signal is, that's simply the etheric body telling the soul or telling the cells in the body what to do. Now, the thing about these microtubules is that they're made of these little things called dimers. And inside each dimer, there's a hollow pocket in which there is an electron. So a little charged particle that's in there. But this electron is in a so-called quantum delocalized state. So like if you guys know about the Schrodinger's cat mind experiment where the cat, it's both dead and alive because it's in this weird quantum superposition between alternate realities. Well, the electron in these dimers, they are in this alternate reality state. They occupy multiple positions simultaneously. And this quantum state allows them to be very sensitive to things that are beyond the quantum realm. And so that's where etheric energy can kind of come in and manipulate these little electrons in the dimers, which then manipulates the microtubules, which manipulates the cells. And then that's how our body grows and functions and divides and kind of maintains its shape. So according to one theory, etheric energy is merely delocalized electrons that are kind of spread out in space. So that's one person's theory. And actually, besides Stuart Hameroff, the only other place that I've heard that being mentioned is in Whitley Strieber, the abduction dude, and his book, The Key. It's mentioned in there that the energy body is actually made of delocalized electrons. So take that for what it's worth. The other theory is that the etheric field is related to the concept of the quantum potential. And that has to do with de Broglie and Bohm, David Bohm, David Bohm, David Bohm, that famous physicist who talks about everything being connected and everything being one. Well, in his mathematical theory, everything in quantum physics, it boils down to this quantum potential that's beneath everything that makes molecules and atoms do what they end up doing. And so some people were theorizing that perhaps this quantum potential is the etheric field, but in my opinion, is actually something that's even deeper than that. So some sort of like a sub-quantum medium that can induce fluctuations in the quantum potential. I mean, it's pretty technical, but I'm just throwing that out there for anyone who's interested in that field. And lastly, some people theorize that the etheric energy field is actually some sort of a superfluid, and that's in like a parallel dimension. It's like an etheric fluid, like an etheric superfluid. And you can look up the works of Dr. Alexander M. Mishin, Mishin. He's a Soviet, well, he's a Russian scientist at the International Mega Science Academy. And he wrote some interesting articles in Alexander Frolov's New Energy Technologies magazine, the first couple issues, talking about how the ether is actually a superfluid. And you can manipulate the superfluid by different means to induce vortices in it, different flows, different motions, and you can create some very interesting psychic or psychotronic effects from that. And that then ties into the works of people like Leon Sprink and, of course, Nikolai Kozyrev, who talked about time and entropy as a kind of flow. So that's just a simple smattering of selections from the scientific field. That's the closest I've found within mainstream science of any sort of investigation or theories about what etheric energy actually is. But in my personal opinion, I think etheric energy is simply a substance, a fluid flow, an energy wave pattern in a very close by parallel dimension that is highly coupled to our reality here. So that's etheric. And if you want, I can get into the astral too. But if you had any questions or thoughts on that.
Oh my God, Tom. Where do I begin? How do I?
Yeah, that was heavy. That was heavy.
What do I say to that? You said so much, and I just wanted to jump in, but then I was like, no, shut up, bro. Like, just let the man talk. Like he's dropping knowledge on you. Oh man, I don't know where to begin with that. I had so many different directions. Can I just like don't even like answer any of this until you find one of the like. Let me just throw this out there, and then you take the one that you like the most, and then run with it. Sure. I had some quick questions. So Monroe, that's the guy with the binaural tapes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Monroe Institute, right?
Yes.
And with the Loosh, was he the guy who said that that basically the world was like a Loosh farm where these like archons or whatever he called them? Isn't that like Scientology as well? Is there some sort of? Am I missing something here? Isn't it in Scientology?
Yeah, actually, yeah, you're kind of right. I mean, Scientology, well, there's a lot to be said about that, but yeah, it does talk about these ancient controllers who are in control of our planet. And it was Robert Monroe's second book. I think it was called Final Journeys or Final Journey, and that one, there's several chapters that are devoted to the idea of our planet being an energy farm for these hyperdimensional, I guess you can call them archons or farmers, something like that. And they farm all life on Earth for their life force energy, But humans, being more sentient and having higher capabilities, like higher emotions and deeper levels of suffering, we produce a much higher grade of this Loosh energy. And Loosh, I mean, all it really is, it's a combination of etheric and astral energies. I mean, etheric and astral, they're just two ends of the same spectrum. So if you go to the most lowest, crudest, most physical form of etheric energy, that's what I guess you would call orgone, or like raw life force energy. And if you go to the extremely highest part of that spectrum, to the highest top astral stuff, I guess you could call that love or some sort of divine energy. But it's all part of the same spectrum.
Interesting. Okay. So that's one question I had. So you mentioned Sheldrake. Now he talks about. Actually, I've spoken with Sheldrake via email. He was very kind to reply to my questions. So from just to quick brief on him. So he talks about these, I guess, morphic fields, which what he's talking about, from what I understood, and then you can explain how this relates to etheric. It's stuff that gives life shape. So, you take a cell in the body of a plant, and it's pretty much the same cells everywhere. And DNA or whatever doesn't explain why a plant looks or why it takes on the form that it takes. So he was trying to explain how things literally like look like the way that they do, why they take on the shape that they do. That's what he means by. So you're saying that he's actually talking about etheric fields when he's talking about morphic fields, right? That's a synonym.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly.
But he kind of, I in my mind, I thought it was like something astral related, or because he's talking about some sort of blueprint. And one of the things he talks about is that, and this is what I was talking to him about, is that there's this sort of an iCloud among species, where if you have, for example, a group of rats in America in some laboratory, and you expose them to some poison, rats are very good at figuring out what's poison and what's not. Somehow, rats that are in London, for example, will learn about the existence of this poison. So if one group of rats of one kind or one like species or whatever learns about the poison, then the other group of rats, which they shouldn't have been able to, like, you can't explain that through Darwinian or neo-Darwinian theories of like mutation and selection. It just seems that they acquire knowledge over large distances, and he prophesized, or he theorized, that there has to be some sort of like iCloud and information bank that they share. Is that like you're aware, you're following what I said? That makes sense so far? So that's
Yeah,
etheric,
yeah.
or,
It's a matter of semantics,
yeah.
actually, right?
Okay, right, because there's a spectrum, right?
Right.
Okay, all right, cool. Okay, interesting. So, and okay, here's something I think we could go on. Moving. So, where did all this come from? This, I think, comes from Blavatsky, right? She's the first one that sat down and tried to, in her own way, create this empirical, mystical school curriculum, I guess you could say. And she's the one that was pushing this ethereal versus astral type distinction.
Yeah,
Right?
well, she certainly made it more popular. But if you want to go back in history to when it first was distinguished, as far as our records go, I would have to go with ancient Egypt, and it's something that I kind of touched on in the last show, where I mentioned how the ancient Egyptians, their conception of the soul is that it was indeed made of multiple parts. One part they called it the Ka, Ka, and the Ka for them was exactly identical to the etheric body. I mean, they defined it as something that gives us shape and gives us life force. You know, it gives us it makes us alive. So that's clearly the Ka. And then they had another thing called the Ba, Ba, and that they depicted as a human-headed bird that flies above the body when you're sleeping or when you're dead. I mean, what does that sound like? That sounds like the astral body. So
yeah, it does.
Yeah. So it's exactly the astral body. And the astral, they say, that's the thing that kind of flits back and forth between our world here and the realm of the gods, like the afterlife. So when you die, your ba kind of goes into that world to get judged, you know, based on its value in terms of its morality and the choices that it's made. So that's the astral body. And then they had one more. I forgot the name of it. I had it in my notes, but went missing. But anyway, the one more thing, it corresponds identically to our spirit. And they defined it as the thing that that stays together and maintains its form between incarnations. So in other words, it's the core of our consciousness, like this, the individualized core of sentience that makes us what we are, like makes us aware and alive, like real, like it existing. That thing, that is the core spirit. So, you know, so they divided the non-physical part of the body into three things, you know, the Ka, the Ba, and this third thing. And that directly corresponds to the etheric, the astral, and what I term the spirit. You know, some people might call it the mind or the higher ego, but, you know, or consciousness, but, you know, it's all the same thing. So, yeah, so I would say ancient Egyptians had it. And Blavatsky herself, she learned most of her stuff from a group of German Rosicrucians, headed up by this guy named Alois Mailander. And he was actually the teacher of Rudolf Steiner as well. So, you know, Blavatsky and Steiner had him in common as their initiators, as their initiator and their teacher.
Tibetan thing? So she didn't actually go to Tibet? Is that?
Yeah, she might have traveled to Tibet, but her master, her Tibetan master, was, as far as I can tell from everything I've researched and the articles that I've read by other researchers, they believe that it was a composite character consisting of different things that she read, and including some of her own like teachers, including this Mailander guy. So when she talks about this Master M, you know, that refers to Mailander. Yeah.
I see. Well, I'll just yeah, we're again. Okay, how about this? But so she seemed to be advocating for like a global theocracy, was she not? With like a Tibetan type global conspiracy of, you know, she's talking about the White Brotherhood and how there's going to be like a psychic council that's going to decide on everything. Is that part of the Rosicrucian thing, or was that it seems pretty Tibetan? No, I mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, she had access to a lot of information, a lot of research, other researchers. And during that time period, Tibet was hot. I mean, it was super hot. I mean, even by the time the Nazis came around, they were obsessed with Tibet because there was just so
Yeah.
much hidden knowledge and tradition there. Different cult practices and probably like Vimana technology, things like that. So they were obsessed with it even into the Nazi times, and of course during the Theosophy years in the mid to late 1800s. They're very obsessed with it as well. So she knew a lot about it, and she modeled a lot of Western esotericism on Hindu Sanskrit mythology and terminology. So Theosophy, borrowed heavily from Hinduism and Buddhism.
Right, right. And then Steiner comes along and he has he doesn't agree with this sort of bend. He tries to westernize it more.
Yeah, right, right. Because he came from a heavily Rosicrucian and Freemasonic tradition, even like a Mithraic tradition, actually. And so he wanted to westernize it, and he had his own reasons for doing that. I think he perceived the Theosophists as being too derivative, just kind of like parroting what they read of Eastern material rather than truly like digging into it and exploring it themselves. I mean, Rudolf Steiner, he was a clairvoyant, he was an occult scientist, so he was able to go out of his body, do remote viewing, go through time in his astral state, and kind of investigate how reality worked and what actually really went on. Only problem was what he saw, he didn't have the language. The language simply didn't exist to describe it accurately. So he always had to put things into weird terms and metaphors. And then nowadays, when you and I read it, we read it in English. So it's like 100 years later in a different language with a guy that's trying to use inadequate language. So of course, when you read his stuff, it sounds ridiculous sometimes, but he was he's trying his best to describe things that are sometimes beyond words. Yeah.
Well, he talks about the Loosh thing a bit too, doesn't he? And he doesn't use Loosh, but he says it comes back to the moon. He says something that like he talks about a pre-lunar age, which
Mm-hmm.
is a theme that keeps coming up, the association of the moon with these archons. He talks about and the Greeks have this legend as well about the Pelasgians, I think it's pronounced. It's these
Right.
people who, right? And then and then you kind of get that with Gurdjieff, or at least with Moraviev, right, where he talks about the fact that the moon siphons off our energies. It's a satellite of Saturn, which was sent
Mm-hmm.
here, kind of like the Two Towers, Tolkien. Like it's kind of like,
Yeah.
and yeah, and so, but with Steiner, you're saying that he actually walked the walk, but but I thought Blavatsky also walked the walk. Like there's stories about her freaking people out, like sending teacups like floating around the room and stuff like that. Or what do you make of that?
Yeah, yeah. So she had certain occult practices and certain occult powers, and there were many other occultists at the time who could do things too, like Dion Fortune, for example. She could do a number of things, but Rudolf Steiner was something different because, see, the thing is, it doesn't, you can work with lower etheric energies in order to do like telekinesis and levitating tables and contacting spirits through Ouija boards. That's like all like lower occult stuff. But if you shift into the higher part of occultism that utilizes more pure consciousness or the astral body, um, I mean, those are higher level, almost I would say shamanic, but even beyond shamanic maneuvers. And that's one of the rare things about Rudolf Steiner is that he was able to go in that direction, and that's why his material is kind of so out there because he was accessing things that are just very alien to us, because we're used to the five senses, and we can grasp things like I said, like telekinesis or bending metal spoons with our minds. But what he was doing was way more than that. I mean, if you remember, like in the Matrix movie, the part where that little bald kid, bends the spoon in that conversation with Neo, about there being
Yeah,
no about there being
there
no
is no
spoon.
spoon. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kid is in the Matrix and he's bending the spoon in the Matrix. And that's way different from taking the red pill and literally exiting the Matrix, right? So those are two different types of skill sets.
Right. And what would the kid be more like?
The kid would be more like Blavatsky or any of those spiritualists of the 1800s who can pull
Oh,
interesting tricks like manifesting ectoplasm or levitating, things like that. It's like, oh, see, that's all happening within the physical realm. But to take your
right.
consciousness and move your consciousness out of the matrix into some other part of this whole existence, that's something else.
But I didn't think we'd go here with this one, but isn't there like you get this a lot in say Father Seraphim Rose, who pretty much did like a deep dive on all of this stuff as well, and but he he couched it in like the Orthodox terminology that he was a part of that tradition. But he was talking about, and not just him, but you get this also with Gurdjieff and Muraviev, I guess because they're all sort of Orthodox related. But they're basically saying that actually you're limited. You can't go too high, that you're going to hit like a barrier or like a gate where even if you're in this astral form, your astral body, there's still these like archons or like these louche farmers that like won't let you go any higher. That there's, are you saying that Steiner like transcended the limits of that? Like he broke through that barrier, or you don't believe in that at all, or like you have no idea what I'm talking about?
No,
Jump in
no,
here.
yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. Well, in his book, what was it? How to Know Higher Worlds or Outline of Occult Science, one of those books, he talks about what it's like when you leave your body and you maintain consciousness even in what we would call the dreamless delta state of sleep. Okay, and that's typically when the spirit or consciousness, along with the astral body, leaves the etheric and physical body behind and goes up into the astral realms and the higher parts of that, which are even beyond the astral. So he describes as an eyewitness what goes on in those higher realms. So the question really comes down to whether you want to consider those higher realms still within the entire gamut of what the archons control, or if
Right.
it's beyond them. Now, Steiner does talk about something that he calls the dweller on the threshold, which is this ghastly being that stands at a certain threshold, and you'll encounter it if you do his level of, I guess, initiation and shamanic psychic training. You'll eventually encounter it. And it's essentially just your shadow, it's like a personification of your shadow, and you have to kind of go through that and have a reckoning with it in order to progress further. So I can imagine during ancient times that if any Gnostic kind of encountered that thing, they would interpret that as an archon rather than a personification of their own shadow. Not to say that there aren't archons. I'm just saying that for sure, at least according to Steiner, there is something like that you will encounter and that you can indeed get beyond. So, but I don't recall if he ever talked specifically about, let's say, like a group or a council of archons that keep you from going even higher. So I don't really remember reading that in his material.
Yeah, I never came across that. I haven't read all of his stuff though. I think I read like almost all of his essays because the books were too difficult. But but you get that also in Buddhism. I mean, the last thing that the Buddha does is he has to encounter like this sort of evil deity who's trying to convince him to stay, and he has to beat that deity, and then, or it could be a shadow, I don't know. And then
Yeah.
you get this in obviously the Orthodox tradition with Jacob's ladder. This idea that like there's like a lot of religious Christian art where you're climbing up this ladder and these like black entities swarm and like try to attack you and pull you down. And you get that in Father Seraphim Rose, who was accused of being a Gnostic. So that's why I lend credence to it. And the stuff, I mean, he knew his stuff. He like really researched it, and he was in California, and it was a hotbed of like interest in all this sort of thing at the time. But I wasn't planning on going there. We could come back to that maybe another time.
Yeah, but I'll just mention briefly that when you
Go ahead.
mentioned about the black beings on Jacob's ladder, well, in near-death experiences, when you're going towards the light, and that's a whole subject in itself, whether the light is a trap or not. But regardless, on the way to the light, to the left and to the right of the tunnel, there are plenty of dark beings who are just wishing that they could, take you into their arms and lead you astray. So it happens even after death, potentially, that these dark archonic beings are around and try to interfere with the conscious ascension process.
It's like Donkey says in Shrek. I think it was Shrek 2. Don't go into the light. Yeah. Cool. And all right, but let's that is like next level stuff. It's really interesting. But let's circle back to the etheric body. So we left off with one more question about Steiner then. So from what I understand, he was focusing on his teachings more on astral type stuff, right? And that was his goal, and that's why he created the Waldorf schools. Just a quick story.
Essentially. Yeah, well, see, yeah, I mean, he had access to both the etheric and the astral. So, whereas Blavatsky was more just the etheric occult parlor tricks kind of thing. And Blavatsky
Oh,
fans are going to be pissed at me saying that, but yeah, I mean, I think Steiner was a step above all of it for sure.
yeah, I've heard it characterized as Blavatsky is high school and Steiner's college. Uh,
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
and okay, but so that was his intention with the Waldorf school system, is to like teach these esoteric arts to people around the world with the intention of elevating humanity or something like that, right?
Yeah, essentially, I mean, the Waldorf schools, they're more like it's more like if you yourself had knowledge of etheric and astral processes and how the soul works, then what kind of curriculum would you design that would work on the etheric and the astral and the spiritual parts of the kids in order to turn them into more balanced, more, flowering human beings? So, it's not so much that they were teaching kids anything occult necessarily. It's just that the curriculum was designed with occult benefits in mind, spiritual benefits in mind.
I was when I was in St. Petersburg, there's a Waldorf school there. I think there's like 55 schools around the world, possibly, maybe more. I don't know. And the woman I was staying with when I first moved there, she's Russian, but she was a teacher at the Waldorf school. And you know, I only took an interest in it much later. At the time, I had no idea what it was about, and it's not like they were very eager to share. I did pick up some interesting stuff, like about the gnomes. Have you heard about the gnomes?
Yeah.
So is that etheric? Like, is the stuff that he's talking about the salamanders, the undines, I think the sibyls, and the nymphs or something, and the
Yeah, like
gnomes?
selves.
That's
Mhm.
sylphs, right? So that's
Yep.
earth, water, fire, air, and water. So these are like elemental type spirits, and that's related to the etheric, right?
Yeah, that's how he framed it. He framed them as basically etheric beings, like beings that are like thought forms that are personifications of the different elements in nature, right? The four elements. That's how he perceived it. However, there's a part of me in the back of my mind that when he describes the gnomes, I notice an eerie similarity between the gnomes and his description of them and gray ETs in modern UFO abduction lore. There's this weird archetypal connection between the two. And
Hmm.
so, which is interesting because, salamanders, that I think that could pertain to what they call reptilians in that ufology field. And of course, the sylphs and the nymphs, I think they pertain to the Nordic male and female humanoid aliens. So it's strange
Oh,
that it's strange that the four primary alien types, or at least the three of them, they correspond to these elemental type beings, which they've been known and they've been described as such ever since the medieval times with the alchemists and the Rosicrucians and the mystics of the time. They believed in gnomes and sylphs and salamanders and so on. And of course, they ascribed them also to the elements. So it's not like Steiner came up with it. He was just elaborating on it based on his own occult investigation into the elemental realm.
I see. Okay,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Now, yeah,
this is
but as far as the gnomes go, I mean, for all I know, Steiner had gray alien abductions as a kid, and he remembered them when he was an adult. And he's like, "Wait a minute, I must have seen gnomes when I was a kid because that's what they look like." And then he, kind of elaborated on it. But I don't know. But I do think there's a weird connection there with that and aliens for sure. Hey, is your mic cutting out? I believe it is.
sorry, it went out. He talks about like in his book techniques, I guess you could say, where it seems to be oriented around utilizing periphery vision. And is that what we're talking about here, or is this like more DMT type visions? When we're talking, what are we talking about here? Can you give me some more information?
Yeah, well, from what I could tell, Steiner was able to switch into, I guess you and I would call it probably it's like a clairvoyant hypnopompic state. Okay, so in this state, he was able to see things in the physical world, but from an astral perspective. So he was able to peer into the astral plane that is that interlinks with and is behind what we see physically. So when you look at a flower, our eyes only see the shape and the color of the flower. But when you look
Right.
at it through this clairvoyant astral vision, you start seeing the archetypes and the beings, the hyperdimensional dynamics that are behind this flower. Okay, and to
But
Steiner,
yeah, but
yeah, go ahead.
he talks about like using his periphery vision. That's like one of the exercises that I remembered You're supposed to like look at a flower, but like not look at it directly using your periphery vision.
Okay, yeah.
Is
Well,
that
that's for yeah, right. Yeah, that's for seeing the etheric life force energy field of a flower. Because
right?
the thing is,
Right.
because when you're looking perfectly focused at something straight on, essentially you're in your beta brainwave state, and
Right. Right. Right.
in a quantum sense, you're focused down into a little pinpoint of consciousness. And so when you're that locked into physicality, you're not going to be able to see anything that's beyond physicality. Let alone the etheric. So of course you have to defocus your vision and kind of defocus your mind. And then when you decouple from space-time just slightly in your consciousness, now you're starting to see more and more of everything that's behind that, the metadata around the flower, the etheric energy field.
Right. So kind of like like the green lines of code in the Matrix or something.
Right,
Uh,
exactly.
but that's alpha state, right? Or is it something deeper?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, alpha state is always the doorway into the deeper states. So you have to go through alpha, and depending on how psychic you are, sometimes alpha is all you need to pull off these things.
So right, it's a combination of alpha plus using periphery vision, and there's been a lot of work scientific about that. It's basically you're switching from left side of the brain to right side of the brain, and it also helps you get into alpha. It's everything's kind of like related. Like one thing helps. For example, like we talked last time, breathing correctly helps you relax. Relaxing helps you breathe correctly. Focusing on relaxing and breathing correctly helps you focus, and you need focus too. So it's like a triangle, and each of these points, they interact with one another, and they supplement one another. So okay, so when he's talking about that, he's talking about etheric type energy. But when you're talking about like salamanders or possibly reptilians, then you're talking about astral type vision. Is this, and you talked about astral vision, is this the third eye that we're talking about here? And is that related to the etheric body? Okay, wait.
Yeah,
So
right.
hold on. So is this like Kundalini, right? Is this what we're talking about here? Moving the energy up through your channels, opening your chakras, opening your third eye, and then you can see the salamanders / reptilians, or help me contextualize all this. Like we're trying to create a system here.
Yeah. Well, here, let me tell you. So I used to do experiments with hypnopompic vision. Okay. And what I would do is I would either take a nap laying down, or I would sit in my chair, kind of relax against the back of it, and try to fall asleep. And the moment I noticed myself falling asleep, I would open my eyes and see what I could see. And because my consciousness wasn't yet fully locked into the physical body, it was bypassing many of the perceptual filters of the brain. And therefore, I was able to see slightly into the closest part of the super spectrum, which would be the etheric plane. And I could see things like thought forms floating around me, like little wriggling, writhing spaghetti ball things up in the air, geometric structures, sometimes things that look like insects or flies or mold on the ceiling. It kind of reminds me of Stranger Things, the Upside Down, if anyone who's seen that show. It was kind of like that. But the point being, I could see as if I were looking through my physical eyes, but my perspective was actually about 1 or 2 inches higher than my physical eyes were. So they're up where my forehead was. And if I didn't know any better, I would say that I was looking through my third eye. Okay. Now, as I was returning to consciousness, I would notice that my the point of perspective of where I was looking from would shift down from the middle of my forehead down to the brow, down to my physical eyes, and it would lock in place with my physical eyes. So in this hypnagogic or hypnopompic state, I think I was looking through my etheric eyes. Okay. And my etheric eyes were slightly detached from my physical eyes and were higher up. So I was very mildly out of body in this state now, and I was looking through my non-physical eyes. And that's what allowed me to see, that allowed me to see these weird etheric thought form structures that are normally always around us, but we just can't see them because our biological brain filters us from being able to perceive it. So, so that to me is etheric vision. Now, the thing is, if I had gone fully out of body and to where I wasn't even in the physical plane anymore, now, I'm on some sort of other dreamlike plane, which they would call the astral plane. At that point, then I would be entirely looking through astral vision instead of etheric vision. So if you think of etheric vision, it's kind of like putting on X-ray goggles or putting on night vision. So you're able to see things like you're able to see into the infrared or the ultraviolet, figuratively speaking. So you're able to see more of what normally surrounds the physical. Whereas through astral vision, you're peering beyond even that into the more symbolic, dreamlike, archetypal back layer, behind the matrix code that that generates our physical reality. So yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen that Japanese anime called Naruto?
Yeah, I've seen parts of it.
Yeah, so maybe it's like they have these like special eyes and they level up, and so there's like one level of eye it allows you to see like chakra, and the other one is like it's anyway. It struck me. If people know what I'm talking about, they know what I'm talking about. But if they don't, whatever, it's just
Yeah.
another metaphor. Uh,
Yeah,
okay,
but
cool.
hey, you know what? That's a good point there, because the thing is, see, when we talk about chakras, right? So the Hindu system, we all hear about the chakras, the seven chakras, and
Yeah.
that's what everyone talks about. But don't forget, even within the Hindu system itself, or even in Chinese medicine, like in Qigong, for example, they don't talk about the chakras necessarily. What they talk about are three different energy centers: the lower uh, dantian, the middle
Dantian.
dantian, and the
Yes.
upper dantian. Okay, and
Yeah.
even like astral travel researchers like Robert Bruce, his book Astral Dynamics, or his book, I think it's called Energy Work. Those books, through empirical experimentation, he was investigating these different energy structures, and he also discovered, yes, there are indeed three different energy reservoirs. And then people might ask, okay, well, how do those then relate to the seven chakras, and how does that relate
Hmm.
to the meridians and the acupuncture points and all that? Well, the fact is, these are different layers of the soul. So you got the etheric layer with all of its structures, and you got the upper astral layers with all those structures. And so if you're clairvoyant and you look at someone, depending on the quote unquote eyes that you have, you might only be seeing the general etheric part of it. You might not even be seeing the chakras. Whereas if it's tuned differently, maybe your etheric organs develop differently. Now maybe you're seeing more of the chakras and not so much the etheric structures. So I think that's why there's some divergence within this field amongst different cultures, because the people that originated it had different spectrums of the soul that they could access through their vision.
That's awesome. But all right, then why do we need the etheric body, us personally, in terms of our spiritual development? There's obvious health benefits, right? Like you can heal yourself if you're attuned to your chakras, I suppose. Um, why do we need it in terms of spiritual development, though, right? It seems like astral is the way to go.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So the thing is, if you want to have any sort of influence, like occult influence over the physical domain, and I'm talking about telekinesis, healing, levitation, things like that, then you're gonna have to go through the etheric body, because the etheric is what interfaces with the physical, and so that that deals with the physical plane. But if you're only interested in conscious advancement and nothing else, then sure, you don't even need a physical body. You don't even need the etheric body. You can just be in the astral planes. You can just be a consciousness inside of an astral body in the astral planes. And indeed, that's often what you hear about in afterlife studies or near death studies or things like that, of discarnate humans or higher beings who are off in the astral planes, learning lessons and teaching and lecturing and doing experiments in consciousness, things like that. So they're not down here in physical bodies dealing with what we have to deal with. So it's because we have physical bodies that we need etheric bodies to operate these physical bodies. It's kind of like, because otherwise it'd be like trying to operate a computer without a mouse or a keyboard. You need that interface to make things work on the screen. So that's what the etheric body is. And if you develop the etheric body, that's what ends up giving you, it can lead to things like life extension, and other like paranormal powers. But like I said, if you just want to be up in the astral planes doing things, and then you don't need the etheric body at all.
I see. Is that like the dark side of I don't know, spiritualism, the etheric stuff? It seems like a lot of these different traditions warn against. Um, you get that in Atkinson quite a bit, even though he does write about like Vril or
Yeah.
prana. But he seems to warn against getting involved with that, and he says that it's basically like a trick. And I think you kind of get that in like a lot of different esoteric writers who are like, yeah, don't spend any time with this occult
Hmm.
etheric stuff. Would you say that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, essentially, because I mean, even in the Hindu, like the yoga practices, a lot of these yoga teachers and texts, they talk about don't focus on the paranormal things that happen on your path. Don't focus on trying to attain powers, like they call them cities, I think they're called. But these are different types of occult powers that you can develop. Now, the thing about those things is like it's a kind of like bodybuilding. Do you really need big muscles? And it depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, you can go that route at the risk of, having to buy a bunch of food to feed your protein needs and, getting muscle and tendon injuries and weights falling on you and killing you. It's fraught with risk. But if you want to do that, the path is open. It's just you have to be very careful with it because it's like a combination of bodybuilding and brain surgery. You don't want to just start sticking a knife in your head and swirling things around. I mean, you're going to end up lobotomized, right? So although what we're going to be talking about here in the show is deals with that, I mean, I'm speaking it for information purposes only, because to describe how to do this correctly, it'd be like trying to describe in a podcast how can you do your own brain surgery correctly, to upgrade your intelligence and not mess anything up. It's kind of like that. So yeah, I'll definitely talk about it, but don't try to do this yourself without doing a ton of research.
Right. Oh, so about these risks, then it seems like one of the risks that I've heard of is the fact that as you stimulate the energy body, you attract the attention of these louche entities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the main concern, that you become a juicier snack?
Yeah, well, there's many different side effects that can happen. For example, like here's just like a list of what can happen if you don't do it correctly. Well, for starters, you can cause an energy blockage. You can cause an energy blockage in both your etheric and your astral. You can cause a misrouting of energy, so energy starts going where it shouldn't. And you can also cause contamination. So let's say you do these energy exercises where you're pulling in energy from the environment, or you're pulling it up from the bottom part of your torso up to the top. Well, what if the environment or the bottom part of your torso hasn't been energetically cleansed, and now you're pumping this toxic etheric energy up through your heart area up into your head? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to start messing you up, right? So that can cause problems. Another thing that can happen, which some people have talked about, is telekinetic damage to your own physical body. So, Qigong masters, when they do Qigong stuff, the Qi energy that they utilize, it has a weird effect on blood, like blood pressure. So like if you focus on your left hand, right, and you pump it up with Qi energy, you'll notice that hand gets extremely hot. Okay. And that's partly because the mitochondria, which are very sensitive to etheric energy, they're getting extremely active. So they're producing a lot of ATP chemical energy, and, so it's producing a lot of body heat in that area, but also the blood rushes to that area. And so if you do this Qi stuff, let's say with your head, it's very easy for the blood to pool in your eyes, for example, and now you get blood spurting out of your eyes, or it pools in your brain and now you get an aneurysm. Okay. If you overdo it like that, you can create these weird telekinetic effects with your tissues and your blood that can cause actual physical injuries. And people have been known to suffer from that. So that's another issue. Another one is you can directly tear off or crack or damage part of your etheric body. I used to know a guy who did a lot of meditations on his crown chakra, right? So he was trying to open up his crown chakra. Well, one day he overdid it and something snapped or something tore in his crown chakra. And for the next 2 years, it felt to him like he had a bird stapled to his head, just flapping his wings constantly. This weird flapping, vibrating, annoying thing happening on his crown area for like 2 years straight, until finally calmed down and finally healed. So, those are some examples. You can suffer migraines from the energy getting blocked in your head and not being able to get out. And so therefore pressure builds more and more in your head, and you get all these migraines, cancers, tumors. There's this Ukrainian dude. His name is Bronikov, the Bronikov. And he's got this thing called the Bronikov method, or the Bronikov system of psychic development. His earliest iterations of that, unfortunately, were known for inducing cancer in people. and it took him quite a while to figure out how to get around that. And so now he claims that his system is safe. He got around those obstacles. But point is, if you don't know what you're doing, it can lead to that, right? So it can lead to that. It can lead to heart failure. And then finally, lastly, as if that stuff wasn't bad enough, it can lead to attracting paranormal entities. And the reason that is because if you know anything about poltergeists, okay, poltergeists are known to happen. Okay, well, first of all, if you guys don't know what poltergeist is, that's simply a ghost that becomes so strong that it can start telekinetically throwing things around. So your cupboards will rattle and dishes will get thrown and smashed against the wall, things like that. So anyway, it's known that poltergeists tend to pop up around certain people when they are undergoing puberty. Okay, so all these hormonal changes happening in the body, all these raw emotions that are, being dealt with, it releases energy into the environment that the ghost then feeds on, and the ghost becomes so strong that it's able to affect physical reality through extreme etheric energy power, and that's how it's able to, do telekinesis and things like that. Well, if you do these psychic development systems, it's known that your own etheric energy output gets greatly increased. Okay, and it starts leaking into the environment. Almost like a coal, like a coal power plant. Spewing all this stuff into the air, and so your environment gets saturated with your life force energy that you're pumping out because you've got so much of it now that it attracts entities. Whether it's ghosts or what they call demons, but they come around, they get attracted to it, just like sharks to blood, and they feed on it, and they become stronger. And if you're not careful, they can become so strong that besides poltergeist stuff, they can actually start worming their way into your aura, into your etheric and your astral body too, and start giving you controlled hallucinations. And before you know it, you've got schizophrenic symptoms like voices and hallucinations, and all hell breaking loose in your life. So that is the big package of side effects that can happen if you don't know what you're doing with this. So that is the reason why this is for information purposes only.
Yeah, all of a sudden the warnings of like Father Seraphim Rose suddenly make a lot more sense. Where he's saying like, yeah, I've seen all these hippies in San Francisco trying all this stuff and it's not ended up well. You guys should not do it. There's a reason why you're etheric and you're. He said that there's a reason why. The amazing thing about him is that like he acknowledges all of it, which you don't really get. It's oh man, so much to say. But like, yeah, have you ever read or have you heard of at least the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of the Witches? This.
Oh yeah.
The funny thing is that it was considered a heretical text, even though it was like, against these witches or whatever in Europe at the time. It was these two lawyers, Kramer and so, and they were traveling around. They were documenting all this stuff, and they got into a big trouble with the church because at the time the church was denying that any of this stuff existed. They had like a modern day secular position on this sort of thing, and these guys were saying like, no, we're against it, but like it's for real. And they got into a lot of trouble for that. It was put on the index of forbidden books. And but with people like Seraphim Rose, he also gets in trouble for this. He talks about all this stuff like it's real, like it's a serious thing, and that's why you shouldn't do any of this stuff because of so it's like there's a lot of different nuanced perspectives. There's people who deny anything that's non-material. There's people who say it's real but it's bad. People that say it's real and it's all good. I guess your new agers that you were talking about last time. And then you have people who say, well, there's a very straight and narrow path, I suppose, to navigate through all this.
Yeah, I'm definitely of the latter. Yeah, I'm the straight and narrow path person there.
Right. And you mentioned Robert Bruce, and I actually tried his stuff. I never really could feel anything in my torso. And it's funny, I don't, in the back of my mind, I have this like niggling doubt that it's still like all fake, even though I've had like with the etheric stuff, right? Because with the astral stuff, I've had unexpected success with it. I've been lying down and I've literally had these exits, and I it's not a matter of belief for me. I've experienced it. It's a matter of knowledge. But with the internal, chakra work or whatever, the internal energy or Dantian work, it seems so. I don't know. I've never been able to experience it, but but you said something about the mitochondria firing up, and I have had that with my hands and with my feet. So his system starts with basically just moving your attention, and also using sort of like your hands to like lightly brush your palms and whatever, and then you sort of like keep that phantom. So you use it physically. You use your fingers to affect this like touch sensation in your body parts, and then you remove the touching element and you just sort of focus on the phantom feeling, and you kind of just move your mind's eye back and forth. And yeah, I've had it. My whole hand has been like completely on fire, like just blazing, and almost I had to take a cold shower and it didn't help. I was like, what the hell is going on? I've never had that with my torso, and that's why I've always been a little bit skeptical about like these chakra centers and everything. I'm like, I can't feel any of it. Uh, but so and now you're telling me that there's a chance I may have attracted a ghost to me because of my experimentation. I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, no, I mean, no. See, because you said that you had difficulty with those exercises. I mean, you felt it in your hands, but
Right.
because you mentioned you had difficulty overall, and you didn't necessarily become all that psychic from it, so therefore, I don't think
Nope.
you have too much to worry about. Because, see, the degree to which you are psychic is proportional to the degree that, generally speaking, you are outputting this etheric energy. So the more psychic you are, the more etheric energy you're putting out, or the more emotional you are, because it's all loosh energy, right? I mean, loosh can be just raw life force energy, or it can be emotional energy, or just
Are you saying
psychic energy.
are you saying it's the more you have or the more you're emitting? Or is that the same?
Both, the more you have and the more you're emitting, because I mean, the more you're generating internally, or actually, I mean, to be technically correct, the more you're pulling in from another dimension into the energy centers in your body, and so therefore you have it
Cool.
more within you, but also any surplus kind of gets pushed outwards into your environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. But so there's definitely negatives, but the positives are that if you do it correctly, what like you it has effects on everything, right? This is a big topic, right? But it can affect your astral development as well. There's a relationship between that, where the better control you have over the etheric body, the more this translates into astral control as well, and
Kind
mastery.
of, yes, because, well, right, because when you do when you try to do astral things, if your etheric body is just too weak, your consciousness isn't it's not present, it's not centered enough, and it simply doesn't have the oomph, the fuel that it needs to do these mental, emotional, psychic maneuvers and practices. So sure, I mean, if you're too low on etheric energy, you're not going to be feeling like doing anything. So in an indirect way, it can help with that. Yeah. But in terms of answering your question about what is the ultimate goal of etheric body development, I would say that etheric development is developing a kind of technology, technology of the soul, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And the end goal, or the end state of it, would essentially be superhuman control over physicality as we know it. So if you want to be superhuman, like the ETs, or like those ancient esoteric masters, if you want to have paranormal powers, that's the route that you would have to go. Just doing astral stuff is not going to get you there. So yeah, so that's why these very specific systems of techniques are needed to do it right, to do it safely, and to get you there without taking multiple lifetimes, because it does take a long time to develop. It's quite difficult. It's a yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, but we've talked about this as well, not on the podcast, but that there's a lot of problems with these systems, not even from like the risks point of view, but just from the fact that they don't seem to work because of it could be a lot of things. It's like perhaps they were developed when people were just more healthy in general, when people had an easier time just being an alpha during the day because they lived a different kind of lifestyle. They used periphery vision, whereas nowadays all we do is stare at computer screens. We're sedentary, bad food, lots of stress probably in modern day life. And so a lot of the stuff they're talking about, they're sort of assuming a baseline level of health or some sort of attunement to the body that the average person does not have post 1960, I'd say.
Right.
So I bring up this example of, I don't know if I brought up with you before, but there's this island off of Scotland called the Island of Skye, and everyone there just had like supernatural powers. It was just like a thing. Everyone knew that the people from this island, they had these abilities, or I think it was mostly like astral related stuff. Like they could astrally project. They had visions and some form of clairvoyance, and then what would happen is if they ever moved to the mainland and settled in the cities, they would immediately lose those powers. And there are like similar instances of specific geographical locations in the world, most of them related to higher elevation. I think it might have something to do with like CO2 content in the body. and these people seem to just be like naturally predisposed towards it because of their environment, it seems like. And then with modernization and industrialization, we've sort of, and city living, pretty much, we've hit the point where people just, they're not at the level where any of this stuff makes sense intuitively. It doesn't make sense conceptually because we're all materialists in our thinking, but our bodies are just different. And maybe what do you think? Is that one of the reasons why? Like, I mean, I've tried this stuff. I've tried the whole. I've decided to find that lower dantian for myself because I really want to feel that like life energy and not be mopey. I'm dead set on it. You know, I get into alpha and I try to focus on feeling some sort of movement or something in between my perineum and somewhere below my belly button. So far, nothing. I'm not gonna lie. I haven't had anything. I can get into alpha. I'm not. That's a true feeling. That's a state that I can describe. I feel it in my body. I feel it in my mind. It's objective to me. It might be subjective actually, but you know, it's even that it's subjective, but I feel it, right? But this, and I'm thinking that this would be an interesting thing to talk about for the rest of the show. What do you think about these obstacles I laid out? Like, do you think these ancient systems actually work given the modern reality, or is just, I mean, I think you know what I'm going for anyway. Just jump in.
Yeah. Well, to start off with, I think you're kind of caught in a catch-22 because in order to do these energy movement exercises, you know, whether it's Taoist yoga or some, you know, all these different kind of systems, ideally you would need to be able to feel the energy moving. And one of your issues is that you cannot feel it, right? I mean,
right.
Is that what you said?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is, how can you then do these exercises if you can't feel the energy to start with? And the only way to really feel these energies is to develop those etheric organs that are developed only by doing the energy exercises to begin with. So it's this weird catch-22. It's like, how do you do one thing without the other, but then you need the other to do the first thing. So I mean, there's different ways that you can get around that. I mean, usually the way it works is you have to bootstrap based off of some level of psychic activation that you already naturally have. You know, it's kind of like, you can't really start a fire if you don't have a spark or like a little ember. You know, you need a little ember, and then you can use that to kind of catch everything else on fire. So if someone is already just naturally just a little bit psychic, that'll give them just enough of an edge to kind of bootstrap themselves up and to be able to do these exercises and start to feel it, and therefore start to do it, which then develops their abilities even more so that they can feel it even more. But if you can't do any of that, then the only other alternative, and that's something we kind of touched on in part one, is that you can instead then try to do these exercises in the slightly OBE, mind awake, body asleep state. You know, so if you go into alpha, maybe even a little bit deeper than that, and you start feeling yourself going into sleep paralysis, like your body starts melting and kind of buzzing, when you're in that state, then when you do these energy exercises, you should definitely be able to feel it. But if you're just like awake and you got your eyes closed and you're sitting in like a lotus position or something, like, you know, what all these books and courses and videos, that's what they try to tell you to do. If you do that in our modern, I mean, the modern mind, as you said yourself, is so locked into beta, it's not even funny. You know, like, we're so locked into this 5 sense beta brainwave reality that even when we've got our eyes closed and we're meditating, we're not really in as deep as people would have been, you know, 200 years ago, or people that are very much in touch with nature and with the natural circadian rhythms of the day and night cycles and so on. So you're totally right that our environment nowadays is completely antagonistic towards the development of these particular skill sets. And that's why ideally, because when you mentioned, you know, being up at higher elevations, partly, okay, sure, you know, it could be due to oxygen and CO2 concentrations, but I think another factor that plays into that is the fact that we are literally swimming in an ocean of etheric sewage right now. Because if you look at modern society, modern culture, the population densities nowadays, all the thoughts and feelings and, you know, base energies that people are putting out, it's contaminating our etheric environment. And then you add on top of that the advent of the Iron Age. So we got all these iron structures, you know, iron struts in the walls and rebar in the floors, things like that. Iron, as you know, probably according to like Irish folklore, iron, the fairies, they don't like iron. You know?
Oh my God! Yeah. Whoa,
Right?
that's an interesting.
Yeah, and like,
That's
or like, for
hilarious.
example, you can look in the Bible. The Temple of Solomon was supposed to have been built without any iron nails and without any iron tools. And they gave a symbolic reason for that, but I think the real reason is that there's some very sensitive etheric equipment operating in Solomon's temple, and you can't have iron around that.
Is that why
So
it's called the Iron Age? Because it's an age of materiality where we sort of this because we use iron so much, or it's both the iron that we use in our
yeah,
structures and that surrounds us, and it's also like our mentality because it's anti all this stuff, right? It's like we have a repellent.
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
why it's
yeah,
called the
right.
Iron Age?
So yeah, so certain classes of etheric entities, or well, it doesn't they don't have to be etheric. They can even just be aliens. But anyway, any certain class of entities that are very sensitive to etheric energies and stuff, they can feel the difference between different materials. And iron in particular, according to lore, from different cultures, has a very irritating or energy sapping effect on these entities. So during ancient times, when people definitely seemed to be more sensitive psychically, I think they would have known of iron, but I don't think they would have used it commonly. Just because, I mean, the same reason that we don't use uranium to make our pots and pans out of. Why? Because we know about radiation. We know that you shouldn't be doing that because it's bad for you. Well, during those times, I'm pretty sure that they had the same view towards iron. However,
That's amazing. That's an amazing insight.
yeah, it's crazy.
That explains that kind of explains the Bronze Age, right? Because
Yes.
I'm sure. I mean,
Yeah.
like if you assume
Yeah.
that everybody was basically a retard until about 150 years ago, right? Then you'd be like, they didn't think of it, they were stupid. But if you imagine that these humans were just as smart as we were, and maybe in some cases a lot smarter, then a lot of their decisions might have been informed not just by a lack of knowledge, but a deliberate decision not to do something. And then that raises the question, why? And then obviously with the death of the Bronze Age, sort of see a death of this sort of spirituality, right? We have this movement towards modernity. It just starts with
Right.
I mean, when we think of modernity, we think of steel, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
sorry, one last little story. This one woman, she was a story that someone told me. She was living in the dacha in Moscow, and she would go out at night and collect herbs. And she was like, kind of crazy. She had these visions and stuff. And she would never use a metal knife to cut the herbs. She would use a sharpened wooden implement, and she said that all steel was very bad on the properties of the herbs. So I mean, she obviously doesn't listen to you. She obviously hasn't read any of this stuff. It's like some weird intuitive knowledge that was revealed to her.
Hmm.
Crazy, huh?
Yeah. I
Go
mean,
ahead.
even Victor Schauberger, the water scientist, I mean, one of the things he talked about is how water in, let's say, a copper container tastes different from water in an iron container. And it's not just like chemical taste; it's the etheric taste as well. They got different energies that are imbued into the water. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, but
So
as far as like the Iron Age goes, the Iron Age or the Bronze Age started to collapse right around 1500 BC, and that's when the Egyptians invaded the Middle Eastern area and kicked out, started to decimate a lot of the what do you call them, the Indo-Europeans that were living there. But anyway, but right around 1200 to 1100 BC, that's when the Iron Age really kicked in, and that's also when there was a big cataclysm that happened in the Mediterranean at the time, and it kicked off a dark age for like 300-400 years. And it wasn't until after that that we started getting pretty much what we know of as modern history, with the penning of the Old Testament and the poems of Homer and Greek literature, and all that stuff happened after that dark age. But everything before then was essentially not only the end of the Bronze Age, but it seems to be also the end of any sort of widespread psychic sensitivity in the population.
yeah. Yeah. It's all that's well, there's also that theory that Rome collapsed because they had lead pipes or they were drinking out of lead because it sweetened their drinks. And then you have modern day microplastics everywhere. Maybe this is
Yep.
has more explanatory power than Marxism or economic struggle or whatever. It's literally chemicals in the environment or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, we got chemicals in the environment that are physical contaminants, and then we've got etheric contaminants, which I'm sure are being affected by, cell towers, electricity, LCD screens, Wi-Fi, all those things. They affect things not only physically but also on an energetic level. So it's not surprising to me that people have such a tough time nowadays doing these psychic things compared to in the old days. I mean, of course, there are ways around it. It's not like there's no more psychic people anymore. Obviously, there are psychic people, but it's just not as widespread as it used to be. It's not as easy as it used to be. It takes more specialized techniques and more effort and more time to do it.
Hmm. Um, have you met any of these people? Are they prominent? Well, I know. I mean, Robert Bruce seems to, his stuff seems to work at least partially. So I believe that he knows what he's talking about, and that he walks the walk as well as talks the talk. But in general, here's one. In general, do you think that these people are like targeted by intelligence type agencies, or that's a common conspiracy theory? If they're in the know on this, do you think that they're
Well, they
kind
can
of
be
like
because right because well, they're targeted by a lot of different things. Because if you yourself are psychic, let's say you're a ghost. Okay, let's say you're a ghost and you're hanging around, and when you're a ghost and you're looking at the physical environment, you're not just seeing the physical part of it, you're seeing also the etheric part of it. Okay, so when you look at a human being, you can see their aura, you can see probably their internal etheric structures and so on. And so you can tell when someone is psychically activated versus when they're not. You can kind of tell, like, okay, that person there, he's totally shut off. She's quite active. She can probably hear me if I said something. So I'm going to say something. I'm going to try to spook her. And before you know it, that person then starts getting voices and, paranormal things happening because she was psychically sensitive enough to attract the attention of an entity like that who has nothing better to do than to harass living human beings who are, psychic. So that happens. And as far as like intelligence agencies, if I mean, I suppose that they have ways of scanning the population for that. Maybe they got remote viewers or I don't know, some sort of
just the
yeah.
gifted and talented programs. You've heard about those?
Oh, those,
Like
yeah. You're talking about strictly just like intelligence, yeah, yeah, for sure.
oh, well, I don't know. I figured maybe they're secretly testing for other stuff as well. I just
Well, I think that would be an entryway because obviously you wouldn't want to have a psychic to watch and recruit or target if they've only got an 85 IQ, right? I mean, they'd be a liability. They wouldn't be very interesting. So I think you would want to select from people that are already quite intelligent, and the easiest way to do that is through standardized testing in schools. So you do these standardized tests, and you can say, okay, these are the people that scored in the 98 or 99th percentile. And of those, let's watch them. Let's get them into our program. And then, for all we know, some of the people that run these programs or are brought in as guests or whatever, I mean, for all we know, they are psychics. What if they can tell, okay, then Johnny over here of the talented and gifted program, I can see with my third eye that he's got an active third eye. So let's put his name down for recruitment into the program. And then next thing you know, that kid becomes like a MyLab, like a military abductee, and gets mind programmed and used as a psychic assassin or remote viewer or something. I think those things definitely happen, but it's quite under the covers for sure.
Well, I mean, there's a common conspiracy theory on the like 4chan, for example, that that's what GATE was used for. I mean, even the acronym that they use, like GATE, like it's gifted and talented, and I forget what the E is. But I when I was in the States, I did go through that. I got so you're asked to go into this room, and you just do a bunch of weird tests, and then at the end of it, they tell you whether or not you're gifted and talented. And then from there, some kids continue within that specific program, whereas others are like recommended for like magnet courses or whatever. The thing, like you've been in America, like all this stuff, right? It's because in my mind you're European, but you're American, right?
Yeah,
Somewhat.
I went to American school starting in
Okay.
third grade. So
Okay.
yeah, I was
Cool.
part of the talented and gifted. I was part of that.
Right. And then some kids who like went further, they claim that like the test got like really esoteric and stuff. So that's like a common conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's no surprise at all. And I've also heard stories from people in the military who they tested really high in intelligence, and then they get approached and then they get recruited into these black programs. But these black programs, they involve, I mean, it's not just like, oh, working on secret UFO tech or secret propulsion or energy or whatever. It's not just that. It's like they test you also for like psychic ability. And then if you score really high in psychic ability, then you're drafted into these other black programs that use that, specifically for whatever. I mean, there's this guy, what's his name? Dan Sherman. He was in the military, and he claims that as part of his job as part of these the secret programs was using his telepathic powers to interact with some alien entity and transcribing messages from this alien entity. And I know it's a weird story, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if that sort of thing were going on.
Yeah, there's that movie, Men Who Stare at Goats, and it's based on, like, I guess, secret documents that came to light about this program to create these psychic soldiers or whatever. And it's sort of portrayed as a comedy, but it seems that there actually is a lot of well, I mean, they portrayed as that there was just like one program and it was just part of like one military Cold War project, and that it was scuttled. And but there's a chance that it wasn't, and that it still continues. I mean, if you were military, why wouldn't you continue
Right.
investing in such a program? Yeah.
And
Anyway,
I think a lot of these programs that we hear about, I think some of these programs might have been, I think they might have been like surface level mainstream military getting into that subject, and then they try it out and then they kind of shut it down. Little do they know that decades before they even did it, another part of the military, a deeper part of it, had already been doing that, and they had already perfected it by the time these guys came along and tried it on their own. So just because we hear about a program like that doesn't mean that that's the first time the military ever did it, right? I mean, it could have been more advanced versions far earlier than that we would never know about, or that they even didn't know about.
Well, I mean, I would assume that it would have started then sometime in the early 20th century when there was a rekindled interest in this sort of thing. It wouldn't have been before that, because at that time, Europe and America was going through this like rational, secular, materialist Enlightenment period. And we really get a flowering of all this stuff sort of later in the 20th century. So that would probably be the start date, I would say. But
yeah, I would say
know?
so. I would say, though, that within America, if you look at things like, well, like the whole Jack Parsons stuff, him and Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard, that whole crowd, that was government stuff that involved occultism to a very high degree. And that was already, what was it, like the 20s and 30s. So that was pretty early. And then, of course, you had the Nazis doing their thing with oh God, what's that? Well, their occult research division, the Ananurba, I think it was called. They were doing that, and then the Soviets had their psychotronic research. So that was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, right? And you would think that in America, the CIA with MK Ultra and all these other mind control projects and mind exploration projects, that within just like 1 or 2 decades of that, they would have gotten it down to a science, and that would have been by the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, and when did we get Monroe? Was that in the 70s as well?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, which is funny because last time when we spoke, we were talking about like, there seems to be a lot of like scientific discovery in this field, and it's kind of weird that the mainstream is totally ignoring it. I would see it this way. I would feel like anyone who wanted power or who wanted to control the populace or to put themselves on top, it would make sense for them to actively deny that such a thing was possible, to keep most people ignorant of it, and then hoard the power for themselves. I mean, that seems kind of
totally
like if you.
Yeah, that's been the story since ancient times. Whether we're talking about the Egyptian priesthood or going through history, like the different occult secret societies throughout the ages, and even the Vatican, the Jesuits. Yeah.
Or Tibet. These guys created like a brutal theocracy, but it was also based around Bon, which was like this like dark shamanic stuff with a thin veneer of Buddhism. Have you ever done these deep dives into Tibet and like all the crazy stuff like skinning people alive? And
yeah.
It seems like it seems like this like. Does that stuff work, by the way? Do you think any of it? Like, how does okay, when people think about occult, when they think about that. They think about like body parts being chopped off, blood sacrifices, cannibalism, perverse sexual type stuff. Is like, what does that is that related to astral stuff? Is that related to etheric stuff? Like, what, where did, where does this, how do we tie this in? Like, we're building a system here. We've covered the astral a bit. We've covered alpha state. We've covered what the etheric body is. Where is all this like crazy, like, goats and stuff? Where does that come in? Like, is that related to etheric manipulation, summoning ghosts by like releasing bad loosh energy? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, so basically, if you have a demonic being that you think is a benefactor, like let's say you're, I don't know,
like a tulpa.
Tulpa is part of it. That's part of the same etheric technology. But
okay.
What I'm referring to specifically is that if you have a demonic being that exists in the astral plane, so it doesn't yet have an etheric body, so therefore it doesn't yet have a physical presence here in our world. If you want to get it into our world and give it more power, you have to feed it etheric life force energy. And one of the best ways to do that is through animal or human sacrifice. Okay. So,
okay.
All right. So here's where it kind of ties back into what I originally was talking about. When I mentioned the Egyptians and how they called the etheric body the Ka, well, the symbol for Ka, it's related to the symbol. Well, actually, it's the same name that they had for the bull. And the reason why it was related to the bull is because bulls were sacrificed during those days in order to harvest their life, or not just to harvest them for meat, but to harvest their life force energy. I mean, bulls are huge, right? So they got a lot of blood. They got a lot of like raw life force energy. And so what you would associate with a bull is the raw etheric life force energy that it has. And therefore, it's no wonder that the Egyptians used the same word both for bulls and for this etheric life force energy, Ka, okay? So animal sacrifice during that time was used for harvesting etheric energy. And I think animal sacrifice like that can definitely endow an astral being with an etheric body, which gives it more tangibility, more presence, more power over the physical. So it kind of helps them bridge their realm to our realm. So I think that's where that comes in.
And humans,
what about humans?
I assume.
So what humans have that animals don't is they've got the upper levels of the astral body. So animals have an astral body too, but it's more basic. So therefore, their emotions are more basic than humans. So humans are capable of a higher, more, I hate to say the word exquisite, but it's a more exquisite form of suffering. I sound like Clive Barker now with the Hellraiser stuff, but it's like a more exquisite form of suffering, and it produces a higher grade of this loosh energy. So that is even more empowering.
It's like Monsters Incorporated, right?
Right. So Monsters Inc. Monsters Inc. like depicted it in a very, very symbolic way. And there's other movies too, like Doctor Sleep, which is based on a Stephen King book, which also gets into, the harvesting of life force energy from the killing and torturing of living human beings. But yeah, Monsters Inc. That's a cuter way of addressing a very, very dark subject.
So, but differences aside, sacrificing humans then would also imbue these astral demons or whatever with that life energy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it powers them up, and it also powers up the demonic entities that are possessing the people that are doing it. So if the entity is stronger, then it can interface with the person stronger, and so therefore the person might experience, a stronger occult powers. Maybe absorb some of the life force energy themselves in order to keep them younger. So it's a very dark misuse of this whole thing, because if you were to do it divinely, if you were to do it positively, you wouldn't need to sacrifice animals. You wouldn't need to sacrifice humans, because you're pulling in that energy extra dimensionally right from the source. Like you directly plugged into the source and you're pulling in that energy. And so therefore now you're getting these powers, you're getting life extension, but only if your astral body is attuned to these divine vibrational frequencies, I guess you could call it. So if
these people are just lazy, right? Is that the thing?
Yeah. They're lazy, and they're selfish, and they're dark. So, and it's their vibrational darkness that cuts them off from the divine source. And so therefore, since they can't plug into that, they have to harvest it like predators and scavengers from their own plane. So now then you get humans sacrificing other humans to absorb the energy, or sacrificing animals in order to get that energy, when ideally they shouldn't be, if they had simply turned the other way and gone in a positive direction instead of trying to hang
Right.
on to their ego and their shadow and their inner demonic ways.
It's strange. I always assumed all these tactics were basically just like terrorism. For example, to keep your Tibetan theocracy in control of the masses of slaves and serfs, you periodically you kill a baby in front of them or something, or you skin somebody alive, and that keeps
Yeah,
them in line to
yeah,
the
that
use of
too.
terror. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
But
totally.
you're
It's a multi-purpose thing, you know.
right. But yeah. Okay. And then,
It's like when they sorry, it's when they take every part of a cow and they use it, like the Native Americans, they used every part of the bull, or when they make hot dogs, they use every part of the animal. Well, it's kind of like that. You can use this occult technology to gain all these multiple cross-spectrum benefits if you use it for dark. You can use it to empower the demons that control you. You can use it to terrorize the population. You can use it to contaminate the Earth grid. So you can like kind of terraform the planet on an etheric level to make it easier for demons to come here and wreak havoc population wide. It's all these different things. It's all compressed together in a multi-spectral attack on the human divine spirit.
well, all of a sudden Christians start coming off a lot better because they do away with all sacrifices except the symbolic eating of the bread and the wine. So
Right, right. Because if you compare the ideals of Judaism with the ideals of Christianity, like post Jesus Christ, you can tell that vibrationally or ideologically, the first one is definitely more beneficial to the dark beings, right? The whole like psychopathic vengeance, bloodlust, animal sacrifice, right? Everything with
yeah.
like blood and sacrifice. That was that. And then after that, you've got more like self-sacrifice, sacrifice of the ego, tuning into your heart, forgiveness, compassion, things like that, which is definitely more of a divine orientation. So if you were using this technology, you wouldn't need if you had those ideals perfected within yourself, you wouldn't need to sacrifice animals in order to achieve miracles because you're plugged into the divine and you're kind of under God's wing, and so therefore you get taken care of. You don't have to do that stuff.
Right. If only they just added a little bit of spiritual discipline to their whole thing, Christianity could be a force for good, I think, in the world. It's funny because you get all these like Nietzscheans and all these people talking about how Christianity doesn't like worship power and that's a bad thing. And like look at say, the Judaic tradition and look at Islam and these guys. Well, I don't know. I don't actually know. Do they sacrifice in Islam? I know they do it
Yeah,
in Judaism still. They do.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, is
They,
that
they
halal?
I don't know, but they got a goat sacrifice.
Right, right, right,
Yeah.
right. They do that. Yeah. So I always actually thought that the bull or like these specific animals that were chosen had something to do with astrotheology, that it was like the constellation of the bull or something, and that's why you had to
Well,
do the bull.
yeah. I mean, it was during the age of Taurus that it became really popular. So that was
Yeah.
part of it. But bulls are the one of the larger domesticated animals that you can sacrifice to get things. I mean, that's why with cattle mutilations they tend to go after horses and cows because the pretty good source of life force energy and blood and organs.
Hmm. Well, it also sort of like, well, there's also these constant rumors of blood libel blood libel is what it's called, but human sacrifice among the Jewish community in Europe of kidnapping children and torturing them and then bleeding them out. And then, I mean, it's like in every single culture, not even in Europe. It's like you get the same accusations in South
Yeah,
America.
and sometimes those wide open and institutionalized, like during the Aztecs, right? The Aztecs would kill
Yeah.
10,000 in one day. Crazy stuff like that.
Right. But in the end, I mean, it seems like it doesn't always work out. I mean, I mean, if we're talking about like Dungeons and Dragons type stuff, and you've leveled up some demon that's like giving you power, how do you lose at that point? How does someone stop you at that point? And yet, the Aztecs were beaten by 200 Spaniards with muskets. So it's like, I
Yeah,
don't know.
well, the question is, what demon or egregore was behind the Catholic Church, right?
Right, 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 right. Okay, cool. But that's so. An egregore is what you're talking about. You're talking about something that you sacrifice to, which in turn lends you some of its power. Right. That's the concept of an egregore. And Yahweh
Yeah,
is
if you
kind
if
of
you
like
try
a
to make it,
race
if you if,
egregore.
yeah, if you Yes, if you try to make it intentionally. So an egregor or a tulpa, these are all same thing as thought forms. And thought forms are produced unintentionally by us every single day, just from focused thoughts and emotions, generating these little bubbles of energy that float off into our environment. And if you're in a hypnopompic state, you can see them floating around you as these little geometric, weird looking, semi-living structures. But if you take that principle and if you apply it intentionally, then yeah, you can create entities, artificial entities. It's like your own etheric chat GPT. It's like some etheric entity that you're producing. It's like an artificial intelligence, and the more etheric energy that you feed it, the stronger it becomes. And so, there have been societies throughout time that have had various gods, which are nothing more than these thought forms that they've energized through their worship. And then over time, as a society declines, the power of these thought forms declines too, and so eventually they disappear.
Is there any good use of this egregor type stuff that you can think of? It seems universally negative from what we've discussed.
Well, no, because you can program them with intention, right? So I don't know if I should mention this, but yeah, sure, why not? So Michael Topper, he's he's sort of like an underground, fringe esoteric writer figure. He was quite popular, like, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. But anyway, he knew a lot of stuff. He's very smart. And one of the tricks that he mentioned people can do to guard against psychic attacks is to create these thought forms in the shape of dogs that would kind of circle around you in the etheric, and they would alert you and fend off any psychic attacks that would come your way or any negative entities that would come your way. So, you can program them to serve that function, it's just like AI, right? AI can be used for good, it can be used for bad. You can program an AI to work as like a spam filter or like a security system, and it'll do that job. So it's not just for bad, but it is a technology, and like all technologies, it can be used or it can be abused. So I think it's wrong to dismiss it all as like witchcraft and Satanism. Like, just stay away from it. I think the only reason why people are told that is because whoever is saying that knows that this technology, people just aren't smart and disciplined enough to apply it universally in a way that's safe. So that's why they tell
they're
the
ones
masses
that have the technology and they don't want the masses to. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. See, they tell the masses to stay away from it. But in their own secret societies, when they recruit someone into it, they're like, okay, sure, we told everyone else to stay away from it, but you're going to learn how to do it because we're going to teach you how to do it right. So yeah, in their little circles, they're totally down with it and they use it, but then they tell the masses not to do it because it can cause bedlam. Like if you're a positive secret society person, you're going to be worried that harm is going to come to people from misusing it, on each other and to themselves. And if you're a negative secret society person, you're going to also likewise want to keep it away from everyone because you want to hoard it for yourself so that you have this asymmetric power advantage over the population. So whether you're positive or negative, as long as you're one of the secret society people, there's certain things that you're both going to agree upon should not be released to the public. And unfortunately, that's why we are here having this discussion, speculating about these things, because it's not common knowledge, because it's been kept out of the public hands.
Yeah, we're just clever peasants that are like figuring it out, right?
Yeah.
We are not initiated. At least I'm not. But no, but I wish there was some guys on our side, some like Jedi that were on our side.
Yeah, well, there are like different systems that we've mentioned where you can, if you study these different systems, you can kind of piece it together, right? So for example, this is just for the benefit of anyone listening who wants to research this for yourself. I made a list here of like 10 different things you can look into if you want to get into this. So the first one is called the Kerning system. It's by J.B. Kerning, who was an opera singer from the 1800s. He was a Freemason. He was a clairvoyant. And he put together the psychic training system, which he taught to a select few private inner circle. It's called the Kerning system, and there's really not that much information about it. You can find information about it, but it's not complete. But I'm just mentioning it for posterity. So besides that, you've got Rudolf Steiner, his book called How to Know Higher Worlds. That's like a pretty good introduction to his system about it.
It's not. I've tried it. It doesn't.
Yeah. See, that one's difficult. See, that one's difficult. You know why? You know why it's difficult? Because he doesn't give you breathing techniques. He doesn't give you energy movement techniques. Okay. All he does is he gives you ways of using your different energy centers. Like for example, when someone says, "Hey, how do I activate my heart chakra?" If someone tells them, "Oh, well, just visualize light in your heart chakra area spinning around and growing brighter and brighter and brighter," well, sure, that's one way to do it. But then I say, well, why don't you just have the feelings of love and compassion and do like a loving kindness meditation that actually uses the heart chakra as it's meant to be designed, instead of trying to visualize light, making it glow brighter and brighter and brighter. It's like why do this artificial way around it? So Rudolf Steiner goes the more direct route, like for this part of your astral or etheric body, like have this mindset or have these like lifestyle practices or emotions, and it'll like balance it and grow it. So that's what I like about Steiner, is that he went that particular route, and he did that because he knew that would be safe. If he started telling people about breathing a certain way and visualizing light and energy moving in a certain way, that's what can lead to like cancer and tumors and migraines, heart attacks, things like that. But if you're just doing the emotional stuff, like think more positively, be more assertive, to work with the throat chakra, things like that, it's not going to hurt you. So that's why he went that route. But unfortunately, because he went that route, you, Rolo, are probably not going to feel too much from it, because it's a much slower form of development.
You failure. Okay, all right, that's
I was going to be humorous there.
Yeah. All right,
but
okay, interesting.
but just real quick though, just to finish up the list, I've got Taoist yoga. You can read stuff by Charles Luck and Mantak Chia. They've got stuff on it. Robert Bruce, his book Astral Dynamics and the book Energy Work. Samuel Sagan.
I'll speak for that. That one works. I've done it does work. I couldn't feel it in my torso. So all that good stuff is in your torso. But if you want, you could literally try his hand stuff, and it seems to work really easily for most people. So give that a go.
Yeah, you know what? That's right. That's what I forgot to mention earlier. I believe that one of the reasons why you couldn't feel it in your torso is because you were primarily feeling with the secondary effects of etheric energy activation upon your nerves and your blood. Okay. So for example, in your hand, in your feet, you've got tons of nerve endings. I mean, that's what the hands are for, they're for feeling things and for, manipulating things, but also for feeling things. And so you can feel stuff that's going on in your fingers and in your hands. You'll feel tingling, you'll feel warmth, electrical buzzing, little pings, things like that, right? You'll feel that. But if I ask you right now, what do you feel in your torso right now? You don't really feel too much. I mean, unless you have an ulcer or you've got bloating or, some sort of issue like that, you're not going to feel too much going on in your torso because there's simply not as many nerve endings in there. And so I think if you were moving energy around, but your brain was only feeling physical sensations, then you're not going to feel much in your torso at all. And I think the only way for you to actually feel anything would be to enter into that mind awake, body asleep, sleep paralysis state, where you're slightly out of body. I think that's the only way that you can feel things through your torso. And I say that because I myself have done that, where I've entered that state and I've tried these energy exercises, and heck yeah, I mean, you can totally feel it going up and down your body. It's like you've got water just like swirling and swishing up and down, like some sort of electrical warm buzzing water going up and down. So it's pretty interesting when you can feel that. But if I'm fully awake, no, heck no, I'm not going to feel anything in my torso. But I will in my hands though, just because they're so sensitive that if the etheric energy increases there and it starts affecting the nerve endings and then the blood's, the blood vessels, I mean, I'd be able to feel it.
Yeah, but you'd think at some point, if you nailed it in that state, it would translate into your waking state, no? Like at some point?
Well, I think you would have to do it long enough. Like you would have to essentially be in this slight out of body state, doing these energy exercises probably every day for a month, 2 months, 3 months before you become psychic enough to start feeling it, even when you're fully awake. That's pretty much what it would take.
Yeah. Right. And it's hard enough to get into that state to begin with. I mean, it's kind of a hit and miss thing. So, but yeah,
it is what it is. Well, it's like bodybuilding, you can't really build anything overnight. It might take, I mean, if you think about like 90 days in bodybuilding, you can get some pretty good results. But if you're only talking in terms of, I don't know, 3 weeks, it's kind of hit and miss there.
All right, go ahead. What else you got on that list?
Okay, all right. So Robert Bruce, Samuel Sagan of the Clairvision School. That's another guy. He wrote a book called How to Open the Third Eye, which has some pretty useful information in there. Oddly enough, even the Falun Gong and the Falun Dafa stuff, the Falun Dafa book, that one has some interesting techniques in there for activating the.
That's like the CIA cult in Pennsylvania, right? Or in New York State, right? The temple.
Oh, I don't know. Are they? I mean, I know the guy's in China, or he used to be in China at least. I
Falun
don't know if he
Gong?
is
No,
anymore.
I thought that was like a diaspora government in exile thing in America. I don't know. Whatever.
Maybe it's been a long time since I looked into it, so I just put it on my list because I remember reading the Falun Dafa book, which is pretty interesting. I mean, the guy who wrote it is clearly clairvoyant,
Hmm.
but like most self-made clairvoyants or natural clairvoyants, they're trying to do their best to interpret what they're seeing. And first of all, what they're seeing isn't always 100% objective because they're looking at it through the distorted lens of their own self-developed third eye, which like can you imagine if someone used like genetic techniques to try to grow a literal third physical eye on their forehead? I mean, they might be able to see like lights and maybe colors through it, but it wouldn't be clear. It wouldn't be like super clear vision. So the same thing with these people who activate their third eye. There's so much that can go wrong in the process that what ends up developing is slightly deformed, and so therefore what they see is slightly scrambled. And then the issue is if they interpret what they see literally, like as objective reality, and then make big conclusions based upon it. I mean that can lead to all sorts of weird scrambled conclusions. And I think the Falun Gong stuff is essentially that. You know, this poor guy who is psychic and he's seen things, he sees entities and parts of the energy body, but it's scrambled, and he created a whole belief system around that, which isn't necessarily fully objective. But there's still useful information. That's why I mention it. So yeah. What else? Oh right, Kundalini yoga. That's sort of a dangerous one because Kundalini, it's essentially etheric energy from the earth itself that your root chakra. During ancient times, your root chakra was plugged into it, but in modern times, it's very disconnected. And so, if you do Kundalini or Kundalini yoga to pull this energy up from the earth through the base of your spine, up the spine, you're potentially plugging an old rusty machine into like a high voltage terminal. The wires might catch fire, it might burn down because it simply can't handle the energy. And I knew a lady who had an inadvertent Kundalini activation, and it was so strong and so severe that she had mild spontaneous human combustion. Like her shirt literally burst into flames, or the flames shooting out her back, burning her shirt, and she had multiple degree burns all over her body because the Kundalini activation was causing fire to erupt out of just pulling way too much energy. So that's a dangerous one, but for informational purposes, it's useful. All right. And just a couple more. You've got the Drunvalo Melchizedek. He's sort of like a new age guru leader dude. Anyway, Drunvalo, he's got this Mayan method of psychic activation. He's got a video on YouTube. I think it's called Mayan method psychic activation, something like that. It's pretty interesting. It's about manipulating the etheric structures in the head in order to increase your psychic ability. So
it's with
that one's kind of
those rays, right? Like
they have this little columns that go in and out and merge at the center of your brain.
But again, you can't use that until you can see it or feel it, right?
Kind of. I mean, the thing is, you can use it flying blind, right? So you can imagine, you can do the motions, you can visualize it, imagine it, and maybe if you're lucky on an etheric level, things are actually moving. But you can't get feedback that is actually working until you do it enough that you start noticing, hey, I guess I am more intuitive and I do have more precognitive powers all of a sudden. Then it's worked, but you're not going to be able to necessarily feel it unless you have some already existing psychic abilities going on. Yeah. What else? Oh, my friend Fore, F-O-R-E. I've known him for a long time, and he's a contactee, like an alien contactee. And he was taught how to do psychic activation training by his alien contacts. It's very technical. It's very interesting. And I believe it's totally legit. But the information isn't really out there too well. But I think anyone who's interested might want to check out his material more. It's floating around the web if you really want to try to dig into it. I mentioned the Bronikov method, the Ukrainian guy. His name is Vyacheslav Bronikov.
The cancer-causing method. That's safe.
Yeah. Well, the one you learn now is no longer cancer-causing, but the original one was, because he didn't incorporate certain safeguards. But that one did cause issues originally. You've got Kriya Yoga, popularized by Swami Yogananda in the mid to early 1900s.
I do
And
some of
that
that.
one, yeah, you've tried that?
Yeah, that one does. You do get like, I mean, it's basically HRV breathing. It's heart rate resonance, heart rate variability resonance breathing.
Hmm.
From what I understand,
Yeah.
it's literally just a mix of entering alpha through using. I mean, there's like more to it. There's like you know, I couldn't like figure out a way to like systematize and understand it. And I'm not just going to go into something blind. But from what I did try and what I did understand of it, it was just a mix of like getting into alpha techniques followed with breathing techniques. I don't know. I mean, I didn't even connect the dots on that one. I thought it was all just well, anyway, the main thing about it is you do breathing at a certain rate, and you really focus on, I guess, where your dantian is, a dantian, and if you really, really can relax your stomach in that area, and on the exhale, you can really relax it. You feel this pleasant, really pleasant feeling. I didn't realize that was is that. I have no idea what that is, but that's like one of the signs that you're doing it right. Anyway, what were you going to say about Kriya Yoga? Go ahead.
I
Now
was
I'm
going to say
interested.
that, well, see, it's had a long tradition, and over the years, well, over the decades, different teachers have added different things to it. So if you try to learn it nowadays from an existing school, you're going to get something that's quite extended or modified, or, I would say even watered down compared to the original teachings. And so if you want to check out one of the more original teachings, there's this book called Kriya Yoga, The Art of Super Realization, Initiation by Swami Yogananda. And it's from the 1930s. Actually, it is from 1930. It's like an orange covered book. You can probably find an EPUB or PDF or get it on Amazon or something. But it's a short book. It's got 3 different exercises in there, and those were the original ones before you got the modernization of it. It's probably similar to what you're doing, but it's quite particular about how you're supposed to do each one. Like you got to face east. You got to be sitting on this wool blanket. You got to move energy up the spine and up through the mouth, over the top of the head and back down the spine. That's what it is. And you got to breathe in a certain way as you do it. So I don't know if the one that you learned is as complicated as that, but that's one of the
No.
main exercises in that book. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sounds a lot like dantian or energy meridian. What is it called? The microcosmic orbit from
Yeah, similar to that.
Taoism. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
the
there's a lot
Mantak
of
Chia
overlap.
talks about that.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of overlap here. No, for me, I found this guy, Forrest Knudsen, he talks a lot like you. I mean, he really likes to use the scientific language, and he's very open minded. Like he'll like bring up all these different other traditions. Like for example, like periphery vision, which we briefly touched on today. He's really into that as well, which is how I found him. And he brings up this Hawaiian technique called hakalau, and he's he was like, oh, did you know that this is also in Zen? Oh, did you know that we also have this in this technique? Oh, so he's always looking for this sort of the same thing, these like overlaps of different traditions coming up with the same thing. And his main thing, his name is Forrest Knudsen, and he's on YouTube. He left the ashram and he sort of went his own way. But his main thing is HRV breathing. So just getting your heart rate in a certain rhythm, I suppose, and with less than 6 breaths per minute, and using that and body relaxation, and also like lifting your eyes, for example, up into like just looking up behind closed eyelids, that you can basically enter into this state that he's trying to get you into. So it seems to be mostly breathing and alpha state based. I didn't know it had anything to do with Kriya Yoga had anything to do with etheric energy, but I guess the original did. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the direct forms of etheric energy manipulation, they tend to have common principles across different systems. One of those principles is to simply stimulate a particular body part by directing your attention and therefore energy towards there. So if you just focus on your hand constantly for, I don't know, 15 minutes, you're going to get the same effect as if you try to do the brush technique that Robert Bruce talks about, like the swirling brush technique. You're going to get that simply by focusing on it, just because it charges that part of the body up. So that's one method. Another one is to literally move energy through that region. So whether moving it up and down the body or into the skull or out through the skull, the movement of energy, when you intend it, when you imagine it, when you visualize it, it does have an effect on the flow of etheric energy, even if you can't feel it directly. It does have it. And sometimes some people, unfortunately, they just have to have faith for 1, 2, 3 months of doing this before they start feeling something for real. And I think a lot of people don't have the patience for it, which is why not everyone's psychic, and because it's not easy to do, it's not easy to teach, and as we talked about, it has a lot of potential side effects.
I saw it as like kind of. Sorry, I just saw it as like a derivation of yoga nidra, where it's literally you just focus on different parts of the body, and you can use yoga nidra to enter body asleep, mind awake. So you just focus on your fingers, your hands. You go down the body. And then with Dantian training, with the Taoist stuff, from what I understand, one of the main practices is finding your Dantian. And the way you do that is you have to be able to move your mind into that area between your perineum and your navel. And so you just sort of, and they say that, yeah, it'll take, like you just said, that it'll probably take you 3 months before you feel anything, but you just have to keep figuring out, you just have to keep putting your mind or your attention on that area, and eventually you'll see something. And then there's other stuff like related to, again, breath work and pranayama, where you do this diaphragmatic work, and it also gets into like reverse Kegels. And so like the main thing is that it seems like that there is like a relationship between the physical body, tactile feeling, and some of this, like there's a relationship between the physical body and the etheric body, in the sense that if you can feel very acutely physical sensation, this neurological or mitochondrial sensation, it will lead to eventually the feeling of the energy body. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating here. I'm hoping that's the case.
Yeah,
that's all I got going for me.
Right. No, and it does get it gets even more complicated than that, because what you just mentioned about feeling different parts of the body and moving your awareness through the body. Well, when you do that on a physical, biological, neurocognitive level, what happens is you start activating a part of your brain that has to do with spatial awareness, with the control of movement, with integrating the different senses, and kind of putting it all together. And that part of the brain, one of the key areas for that is called the caudate nucleus, and also the caudate putamen. That's what it's called. And what these are right at the very center of the brain. Actually, the part of the brain that in Egyptian depiction is the eye of Horus. So the eye of Horus, the eye and the little eyebrow above it, that corresponds to the part of the brain that I'm just talking about, the caudate nucleus and the caudate putamen. And interestingly, ufologist and microbiologist Gary Nolan and Kit Green, they gave a talk at Harvard University in 2018 where they talked about some research they did where they analyzed a bunch of people who are sensitives, who are very intuitive, who are almost like psychic, to try to figure out if they had any parts of their brain in common, that was kind of unique to them and not so much to people who are not psychic. And what they found was that this part of the brain called the caudate putamen is more active, like more dense and larger in these people. And they found some work by a Soviet researcher. His name was, Adrianov, I think, a Soviet neuroscientist named Adrianov, who likewise found out that the caudate putamen is involved in intuition, precognition, and psychic functioning. All right. Now, this part of the brain is also involved in spatial awareness. So, for example, if you direct your awareness to feeling your left hand or your right hand or your left foot or right foot or just the left side of your body and then shifting it to the right part, or if you direct your attention with eyes closed to the space around your head or in the room, trying to like sense things spatially, intuitively, when you do that, you're very heavily using that part of your brain, which coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, is also involved in psychic functioning. So I think some of these visualization exercises, in addition to what they're doing remotely in terms of stimulating the etheric body in that part of the body, or the etheric field in that part of the body, it's also activating that part of the brain that links the physical brain to the etheric body and the astral and the spirit, like the whole psychic functioning system part of the brain. So I find that interesting that there's multiple benefits to some of these imagined movement exercises or putting your awareness on a different part of your body that it stimulates a part of the brain that it seems to be linked to other psychic functions.
Yeah. There's a lot to say, and I was thinking we would have a very nice, neat episode 2, just like episode 1, where basically the conclusion was learn how to relax your body. Whereas here, all I have is just more questions, and I'm not happy about that. How am I gonna make? I need to create. I think a better name for this program is Rolo's program of initiation for the psychically ungifted and mediocre. Like, how to if you do not live on a mountain, if you don't know what nature is, if you stare at the computer screen for 10 hours a day, here's a way that'll work for you. But was that
Yeah.
the last the guy on your list, or did you have something
Yeah,
else to
pretty
add?
much. But what you just said kind of reminds me of another very important point I wanted to bring up, which kind of I think ties everything together, which is the submarine metaphor. If you remember, like you and I were chatting offline, and
Yeah.
I mentioned the submarine metaphor, and I think it's pretty important for people to hear this and to understand, because it kind of relates part one, what we've been doing, to what we're kind of discussing now. So basically, what it is if you think of the soul inside the body as being like a submarine that is inside the ocean. Okay. So when we're awake, the soul is fully in the body. Likewise, the submarine is fully underwater, in this metaphor. But when you fall asleep and you go out of body, you astral project, or if you have a near death experience, or you're entering alpha and theta, whatever, your soul starts expanding and lifting a little bit beyond the physical body. And that's equivalent to the submarine starting to emerge out of the water. And so when the submarine is out of the water, that's when it can see the sky, it can see the stars, the birds, the clouds, distant lands, which it cannot do when it's fully deeply underwater, right? It has to surface in order to be able to see that. And so the submarine has to emerge, the soul has to emerge from the body in order to perceive things that the body by itself cannot. And so that's what we talked about in part one. And that's what you've been really getting into, the idea of relaxing, getting to the alpha. When you do that, that's equivalent to the submarine kind of coming to the surface and being able to kind of tap into the things that are above the water, right? But you see, that is just one method. See, there's another way that the submarine can access those things, and that's by staying underwater, but raising a part of itself, the periscope, above the water in order to look around. Okay, so then it can also see the stars, the clouds, the distant lands, the sky, but it doesn't have to be above the water to do it. Only a part of itself has to be above the water. And so this extension of the periscope is equivalent to what we've been talking about today in terms of developing parts of the etheric body in order to have the etheric body develop extensions that go beyond the body, which in turn gives the body access to extrasensory abilities. And so that's why clairvoyants and psychics, that's why they don't have to be asleep and partly out of body in order to do what they do. They can be wide awake, walking around, talking to you, but yet tapping into these extrasensory data streams. It's because on an etheric level, they are like the submarine that stays underwater, but has a part of itself, the periscope, going above the water to be able to sense what's above the surface. And so that is the link between what we were talking about today and what we talked about last time, right? It's like two ways of accessing the outside. One by going outside, and the other one by staying here, but only extending a part of yourself outside. And extending part of yourself outside, developing these etheric periscopes, as we talked about, it's very difficult, it's very dangerous, but it can be done if you know how to do it right, and you have enough discipline and foresight to do it right.
Okay. Well, so the safe way you're saying is my way, right?
Yes.
I'm not leading people astray. Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, listen, Tom. I could talk forever about this. But what do you think? Should we wrap it up, or do you have something else to add? Because I can start asking about the third eye some more, about a little bit more about Kundalini, but we could just leave it off for a third episode if you're down for that.
Yeah, maybe I got a break to do, but in the future I'll be back and we can go into it some more.
Okay. Well, I think we covered a lot. It was really fascinating. I think it really helped my understanding of just, what's the difference between these two different, the astral and the etheric. What are all these different systems talking about? As usual, we're trying to distill it and trying to put it into easily understood words. It was a little bit more complicated this time, but the same time, it's the more complicated, also the more fascinating, I guess. It's almost mundane to talk about alpha state once you understand it. You're like, well, dude, just, relax, and but for most people, even that is too much. And then when we get into all this stuff about chakra and etheric network and all that sort of thing, it really is. Yeah, it's I think it I don't know. So far we kind of talked a lot about the negative aspects, perhaps, and we got into how it seems that some certain groups of people do know about this and do use it to their advantage. But at the same time, I can't help but think that if people did know about it, there could be a positive way of integrating it into our lives, leaving lives of greater meaning. There's a lot of talk about how life is now meaningless and all this sort of nihilism type stuff. It's hard to you can still be sad and kind of mopey and depressed and low energy knowing about all this stuff, but it's hard to be a nihilist knowing about all this stuff, I would say, because it does just thinking about the possibilities of non-material life, of non-material existence, and all these different realities. It's definitely a cure, I would say, for the nihilism thing, which we have going pretty strong for us in the modern age. But as for everything else, there's like a good side and a dark side to it. I'm trying to think, like, a positive side would be if positively inclined people were to, take an interest in these things, they would in theory become stronger, braver, possibly more inclined to, not just, yeah, I'll end it on this. I'll end it on this note. I think a lot of people, when they're so in that material mindset, they're so caught up in the rat race and they're so terrified of everything, right? They're really worried about speaking out their mind or refusing to get vaccinated or something, or resisting in any way, shape, or form what people with power would have them do. And they don't have any source of energy, of strength to draw upon. A few of them have their faith, like in traditional Christianity, for example. And that's kind of hit and miss, because a lot, just with the corona stuff, most of the Christians I knew went along with it because the Christianity thing is kind of tied up with obedience to authority. But others were able to use their faith in something higher to resist, and they didn't get coerced. And so I think that we do need to search for alternative sources of inspiration, of strength, and maybe this, I think that's what we're talking about. That would be the positive side to all this. That yes, there's all that unsavory loosh farming, mass human sacrifice stuff going on, but there's also the fact that there are other sources of inspiration. It can be a source of positive inspiration, just to understand that there's more to this life than what meets the eye. Anyway, that's the best I have for a concluding thought. Tom, do you have any final words? And I'll let you go.
Yeah, I would say that the system of etheric development, it can definitely be used for good. And I do believe that it is the future of humanity, that in the end, our divine spirit is going to gain full control over our astral body. Our astral body is going to get full control over our etheric body. And our etheric body is going to be so strong, it'll have full control over the physical. And at that point, essentially, we'll be superhuman and we'll have control of reality under divine guidance. And we'll take back the Matrix. That's how I see things.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Thanks again. And I hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
You too. Bye.